This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And make sure to order Jamie Glazov's new critically acclaimed jihadist psychopath, how he is charming, seducing, and devouring us. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Jamie Glazov Moment. Tonight, the left's Suleimani love affair. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're like me, you are still celebrating this wonderful and joyous event that just recently happened, the eradication and assassination of Iran's general and terror master Qasem Soleimani. What a great thing that just happened, and we thank President Trump for this marvelous act in taking out this monster. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a mass murder. The blood of so many innocents was on his hands, is on his hands, and so many of these innocents included Israelis and Americans. Not to say that they're any more worthy than other innocent people, but I'm making the point that Israelis and Americans suffered at his hands. Many Americans had died at the hands of Soleimani. So, of course, because so many Americans died at his hands, because this is a monster, because he's an enemy of America and an enemy of Israel and an enemy of the West, because of that, the American left and the Western left will, of course, love him and weep over his death. They will be very sad. And they were very sad, and we just watched it. We watched it on MSNBC and CNN. We saw how the left was behaving. We saw how the Democrats behaved. And the left was mourning him, and it was blaming Trump for everything. Just like the left cried when Osama was killed, when Baghdadi was killed. The left always cries when the enemies of freedom, when the enemies of the United States die or are killed. The most vicious tyrants, the most vicious terrorists, when something happens to them, the left is weeping. Look up my article, Why the Left Cried When Osama Died. Why the Left Cried When Osama Died. And just Google it. It's at Front Page Magazine, and I explained why it had happened. Now, this time around, if you are by any chance watching CNN, MSNBC, I know sometimes we have to be a little bit masochistic, but we have to keep an eye on what the enemy is doing. CNN, MSNBC, the Democratic leaders, we saw it everywhere, opposing Trump in terms of what he did, in terms of how important this was to do in so many ways. They were minimizing who Suleimani was, and overall taking his side, taking the side of the Islamic Republic of Iran, denouncing the United States. Now, they might have camouflaged or tried to camouflage a little bit or a lot where they really stand, and they tried to blur how oh well, Suleimani might have been a bad guy, but we know where they really stand. We know where they're who they're rooting for. The same thing happened during the Cold War. No matter how much equivocation the left tried to engage in, we know what side they were on. And so in this case, we saw how the Democrats and the left, for instance, were blaming Trump for Iran shooting down that Ukrainian passenger plane. If some of you are behind on all of this, just go to Front Page Magazine and just scroll down on all the articles, because it's all covered there, all documented there, how the left was on the side of Iran's Islamic Republic and of Soleimani in this case. And also go to Daniel Greenfield's blog, The Point, which is also at Front Page Magazine. What's happening here right before our eyes is something that I've given a lot of thought to throughout my life, my friends. I've spent my life thinking about why the left sides with these terrorists, sides with these tyrants. I've written 2 books on this, United in Hate and also Jihadist Psychopath. If you want to know why the left's romance with Suleimani just happened, get my books and read it. If you want to understand why the left is on the side of jihad, why it's against President Trump that's supporting America, supporting freedom, and why the left is on the side of monsters like Suleimani and of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and on the side of jihad, and against the people that these tyrants and terrorists torture, including the Iranian people, who clearly the left is not on the side of, get my 2 books. I wanted to take a little bit of time this evening just to go over a few points, because this is what I do, it's what I've studied. And when I saw the left's Suleimani romance, I wanted to share a few thoughts on why it was happening. Why is the left always supporting our enemy? Why is there this unholy alliance between the left and our enemies during the Cold War on the side of communism and right now on the side of Islam and on the side of jihad? I want to go over a couple of points very quickly. There is the phenomenon called negative identification. And this is when leftists, in a sadistic impulse, are exerting their own power vicariously through supporting tyrants. In other words, when the left supports the Castros, the Stalins, the Maos, the Osama bin Ladens, the Suleimanis, really what the left is doing and what leftists are doing is that they're living vicariously through that vicious, sadistic, tyrannical power that those tyrants and terrorists are inflicting. It's called negative identification. The historian David Potter has documented that particular phenomenon. And so it's very important for you to keep that in mind when you don't understand why the leftists are doing what they're doing. Well, because inside every liberal, as it's said at Front Page Magazine, the motto of Front Page Magazine, inside every liberal is a totalitarian screaming to get out. And so there's negative identification here because the leftists actually are in love with these dictators and live vicariously through their tyranny. And this is why leftists might accuse you of Islamophobia. But when you look really closely at what they're doing, they never support even the Muslim people themselves that are persecuted and oppressed under Sharia law, because they actually support the persecution of people under Sharia through negative identification. It's very important to keep that in mind. There's malice in the left. And for instance, James O'Keefe, for instance, that just exposed Sanders' aides and how they want to set up gulags and how they want to have violent revolution and make their opponents pay through violence. It's the same thing. It's that inevitable violence that comes from the very idea of Marxism and the left. Ladies and gentlemen, it's very important to keep in mind when watching the left and in this romance with jihad and with our enemies, that overall in the left there's a rejection of God. There's a rejection of his creation. They hate that hierarchical order and the creation of God, of all the individualism it comes with and the differences and the talents and all the wonderful aspects of that creation. They want it bland. They want to create sameness. They hate everything that comes with God's creation. And they themselves have a God complex. They are self-appointed redeemers. They've made themselves gods. They're making themselves gods. And they themselves want to create a perfect order on earth with all of this sameness. They're going to create a perfect utopia on this earth. And so there's a rejection of God and his creation. And they get to decide who is saved and who is damned because they're self-appointed redeemers. Now, David Horowitz has done the best work on this. Get his collection, The Black Book of the American Left, and he explains better than anyone what this idea is all about and who leftists are. And because of this God complex, my friends, because leftists are self-appointed redeemers of the earth, this is why you see them trembling at Trump. You know, I was on a plane recently and there was these couple people beside me and I can tell they're watching MSNBC and they're nodding and then Trump comes on the screen and they just, you've seen them, right? They start trembling, foaming at the mouth, they start getting physically upset. It's almost like when holy water is brought into a room during an exorcism and the exorcist just starts trembling at the sight of holy water. Trump represents freedom. He represents individualism. He represents the American idea. He is a reminder to leftists that they are not gods and that they cannot be God. And that's why the left hates Trump so much, because leftists believe that they are gods and he's a reminder to them that they are not. This is why, my friends, leftists yearn to submit their whole being to a totalist entity. It's very important to keep this in mind. They want to blur themselves into a totalitarian whole. They want to die for the idea of Marxism. It's their own twisted way of gaining immortality. This is why they support our totalist enemies. So what they really want to do is they want to lose themselves in the totalitarian whole. They want to become part of that whole Stalinist collective, the Maoist collective. They want all that unisex clothing. That's why they also support the burqa. They hate differences. They hate freedom. They hate individualism. They hate man for who and what he is, and therefore they also hate themselves. There's a death wish here. And that's why, if you study the fellow travelers as I did during the Cold War, when the fellow travelers from the West traveled to Stalinist Russia, Maoist China, to North Vietnam, to Cuba, to Sandinista Nicaragua, these leftists traveled there looking for utopias, but they were really hells. But so many of these fellow travelers themselves were devoured by the totalitarian machines that they worshipped. So if you look today, for instance, the radical feminists going to Gaza to support the Palestinian death cult, many of them are enslaved, many of them are raped themselves. When you look at many of the female leftist European refugee workers that are working with a lot of the people that come from Sharia environments, they themselves are abused and raped at the hands of this totalitarian monolith that they're worshiping. Because, my friends, this is what's important to understand. The shedding of others' blood and the shedding of one's own blood is part of this leftist quest to create an earthly paradise. Leftists believe that they can return to Eden on their own without God. And in this quest of trying to create utopia by themselves, there's a suicidal quest there, a suicidal tendency there. And that's why these utopian revolutions always eat their own. I'm going to wrap up here quickly. So overall, it's very important to understand when you're looking at the left's Suleimani romance, keep in mind that leftists are very busy and they prioritize building a classless utopia on the ashes of this old earth that they want to destroy. When I say old earth, what I mean is the earth that they want to destroy and build their new earth on. And so jihad, for instance, helps them with that. You see, when there's ground zero, the ashes of 9/11, leftists like that because the old earth is being destroyed and they're building their new earth on the ashes of the old earth. It's exactly why the left cheered when 9/11 occurred. And I document that in my book, United in Hate. So to wrap up, ladies and gentlemen, this leftist romance with Suleimani that we just watched happen, if you want to understand why the left engages in this, you have to understand the left's deep hatred of our own society, of the Judeo-Christian tradition, of Western civilization. They hate this civilization. They want to destroy it and build their own classless utopia on its ashes. So, for instance, to admit Soleimani's evil, to admit that Trump is good and that he did a good thing, to admit the evil of adversarial cultures and societies, what that does, if you admit that evil, you would have to admit that our society is worth defending and protecting. And the leftists can't make that move. They can't admit that this society is worth defending and protecting. So the evil of our enemies has to be pushed into invisibility. That is exactly why leftists, for instance, at this moment, are not supporting the brave Iranian women, men, and young people that are out in the streets fighting against that barbaric Islamic Republic, because the left cannot support the Iranian people. Because if they do, they would have to admit that the regime is evil that's oppressing them, and they can't admit that because they want the destruction of this society and of this civilization. Thank you for listening this evening, my friends. It's something I've given a lot of thought to in my life. It's why I dedicate my life to fighting the left. Very evil idea and spawns tremendous evil. Get my books, United in Hate and Jihadist Psychopath, if you want to better understand the left's Suleimani love affair. Good night.